Hello, it's Silver. Alright, this time I'm changing something a little bit. When covering this genre, I use a series called Bullet Heaven, specifically designed for it, and often cover 2 to 3 games at once due to their compact size. This time though, we have something much larger and as a result more expensive as well. So I decided to feature it on its own to make sure I can hit everything I want to cover. Jotunnslayer is a survivors-like that originally launched into early access at the beginning of 2025 and then hit its official 1.0 launch that September. The time it spent in EA served it well in terms of content diversity and polish, and even after it left early access, it has continued to receive some nice updates to keep it going. Now, we've got an official DLC that adds some nice stuff to the game in the form of an actual licensed Conan the Barbarian expansion, of all things. The base game itself is heavily Norse mythological themed, as you can tell from the name, so the ultra grim and dark Conan universe actually fits without much issue. The DLC adds one playable character, Conan, naturally, one new map, Stygia, a dual-layered map with desert sands and ancient tombs to go between, as well as one new god that I'll explain a bit later that doesn't work at all like one of the standard gods in the game already. Since the game already has a significant amount of stuff to do in the base experience, I'd say this DLC is welcome and fun, because it adds interesting stuff without having the base game be so sparse that it feels like it needs this extra content to be worth it in the first place. This genre doesn't traditionally focus on impressive visuals or high-fidelity assets, but with that being said, I think this game looks fantastic. It's easily one of the best-looking games in the genre, maybe even at the very top, even though I don't value super amazing visuals as highly as a solid art style no matter the fidelity. Even I have to admit that Jotunnslayer is lovely to look at. The overall style reminds me a lot of the Diablo games, with some stops over at other ARPGs of a dark fantasy bend, such as Path of Exile 2. Although everywhere tends to be highly detailed and ancient looking, each map has some very different visual themes that carry the art style to a new location. Svartalfheim is a dingy old mine with big stone gates, chains, and minecart tracks everywhere. It's got the fingerprint of the dwarves all over it. Alfheim, though, is a beautiful and fragile high fantasy-like area loaded with like filigreed metal and greenery everywhere, but in an ancient, past its prime kind of way. There's actually a certain tragic vibe to all of these areas, which, if you know Norse mythology, is perfectly in fitting with how these realms are often presented in stories. There's a real danger in these survivors like that the more high fidelity and detailed you make the visuals, the more noisy gameplay gets and the easier it is for the player to lose track of the action. They seem to have solved this mostly using a combination of selective colors and silhouettes. Despite the high model detail, each character, as well as each area's enemies, all have specific colors that feature prominently on them and aren't shared, meaning even at a glance, separating your character from the hordes surrounding them isn't difficult. But the silhouettes are also a huge part of keeping things clean despite all the ruin and grime. The way the enemies look and move is immediately recognizable, and it means when you see them, you never momentarily mistake them for anything else. The smoothly animated playable characters also have very different outlines that stand out completely, with their lovely animations combining with their looks to give these unique profiles that just don't tend to get lost in the muck. The particle effects are actually worth mentioning, in my opinion as well. They have the exact same potential problems as maps and enemy hordes do, and that if you make them too fancy, they can start to blend or overpower the clarity of the image. But Jotunnslayer manages to simultaneously have super nice effects while also not having them obscure the action and make combat more confusing. Things like glowy magic projectiles, or earth-tearing melee attacks, and even stuff like smoke trails all look fantastic, but they aren't so eye-catching that they overlap into too much visual noise. It's nice to have fun particle effects like these because it makes your attacks feel more powerful and satisfying, and they also just look really cool. It helps to establish character identities as well, since each person has their own colors and themes to their skills and effects, as do each of the gods one can choose. I think they mostly manage this clarity by making sure the particles don't hang around on screen for too long, and also by adding some nice transparency to them so that they don't tend to obscure large portions of the screen at a time, even when there are lots of them happening. I feel like these sound effects can be looked at the same way. They sound pretty high fidelity and have a nice impact to them, somewhat bassy for the melee skills, where magic skills tend to have like a sharp crackle and lethal sounding impacts that do tend to feel pretty nice to use. Notably, to me at least, they managed to avoid one of the biggest risks of more complex sound effects, and that's the annoying enemy problem. The issue where there's a specific enemy or spell or something that makes a grating noise while on screen and tends to dominate the soundscape when it's around. Bonus points if the sound gets noticeably worse when there are multiple of them happening at once. Sound in this game is consistently mixed, and the volume won't suddenly jump for a certain skill or boss attack or something, and that's really all I look for at the base level. Music is something that the genre tends to do quite well, which is Kind of funny because it doesn't really have to. There's just a trend of solid soundtracks in many Survivors likes. I'd say this is no exception to that. The music here fits the almost apocalyptic dark fantasy Norse setting, and there's also a surprising amount of it. 25 tracks in the official soundtrack, so you've got multiple pieces that you'll be hearing in any given run. It's got a dark orchestrated sound with a focus on percussion that gives something of a war drum effect. Basically, it's Viking music. It even uses several melodies that are directly inspired by a Nordic song. It's often blood-pumping, battle-ready stuff, but can also fade back to a little more foreboding and carry a somewhat apocalyptic tone that I mentioned earlier. You know, those building drums that sound like a dark ritual is happening nearby and you might be late? That kind of sound. Overall, the audiovisual presentation is nice here, and the game looks and sounds great. It also helps to bring a unified style to everything that feels immersive and fitting. I also think that this extra fidelity and detail is one of the ways the team is justifying the higher price of Jotunnslayer compared to the average game in the genre, something I'll get onto more in a few. I feel like it works in that respect, as players are naturally going to expect a higher priced game to be more premium in its look and sound. The gameplay here is both familiar to the genre and also has some cool new stuff added to the formula, as well as simply executing what we've already expected very well. You'll start out by choosing a character to play. There are quite a few, and it's actually a pretty involved choice because there are some things to consider. Each character has a basic attack as well as 3 traits. These often provide an extra attack of some kind on a proc, a change to the dash, a defensive passive, or even just a simple stat buff. Do note that all of these will inevitably be changed or added onto during a run with all the passive skills you can choose. Once you pick someone, you'll also be able to pick a weapon and an outfit for them. The armor is cosmetic, but the weapon is very much not. Everyone starts with 1 weapon unlocked, and each one after that requires a rare meta resource called soulstones, ascending in price as you go down the list. Each weapon has a small passive bonus you get just for using it, as well as a weapon skill, an active skill on a cooldown that can often be pretty powerful once you figure out how to use it. Each weapon has a different passive and skill, and also a different look that actually shows up in your hand, which I like. They tend to look really cool, and each character has quite a few of these to try out, so there's lots of variety in what everyone starts with. The outfits are cosmetic skins, many of which are unlocked by buying some DLC. I don't mind this because they are entirely for looks, and each DLC seems reasonable as it gives you skins for every character at once. There is one skin that can be unlocked in gameplay by completing a challenge, though, and I really wish there were more that could be obtained this way. After choosing all of that, you choose your map, and there are a good number of these too. A run in this game is called a raid, and the structure is quite different from how the genre often works. Each map has several difficulties you can try, each one making things more complicated and making the raid longer, but also adding to the resources you get. Only the first map and the DLC Stygia map have an easy mode, although Stygia's easy is equivalent to some of the other early maps' normal. Everywhere else, you'll start on normal and ascend up through Nightmare, which can also be modified to become even harder. You'll also unlock an endless mode for each map after clearing normal. Each map also has 6 mods that can be unlocked by doing various things on it. You can activate any number of these independent of difficulty, and they also add to the meta currency you get. Some of these are common across maps, like the Child Rations one that makes food sometimes heal you way less, but most of these modifiers are map specific and hook into the unique gimmicks of that area. Basically, the level of challenge you face is highly tunable, and although the game is tricky at the start, it gets much harder if you choose to let it. Once you're in a run, there are some changes that are going to start impacting you immediately. Your basic attack and all those character passives don't take up any kind of slot, and the classic idea of killing enemies for XP gems is very much intact. You have 5 slots for skills. 2 of them are limited to being used for your character-specific skills. The other 3 are limited to skills obtained from gods. That's kind of an interesting dynamic already, limiting what each slot can do and thus how many of each type one can have. Collect enough XP and you'll level up and get a choice between 2 options, which you can eventually expand to 3. One of these options can be your character, and all the other possibilities are various gods. When you pick someone, you get a choice from 3 possible options unique to that choice. These options will generally be divided between active skills that will take up one of those 5 slots, and passive ones that you can have many of. So your build will begin by knowing what kinds of things each god and character can do, and deciding on a strategy based on what you can get. This means the game is allowed to have a large number of skills because you won't receive a polluted or cluttered pool since the choice is managed by being part of a god or a character's arsenal. Each of those will generally have 5 or 6 actives to choose from, rather than receiving a huge pool containing everything at once. Another difference you'll notice at this point is that the choices have minimum level requirements. This is pretty unusual. Oftentimes in the genre you can select a new weapon and then rapidly upgrade it in successive levels. In this game, leveling up an active or passive requires you to be a certain level for it to even appear. This means that choosing stuff with a higher level investment at the top end, like evolved skills or runes, is an extra time and XP sink for each one, since you'll have to not only spend multiple levels upgrading them, but also get to certain levels at all to have the chance. You can right-click any given skill to see a detailed description of how it acts on each level, which is a bit of extra info that I really like having available to the players so easily. Some games would make you find a wiki for info like that. As you level, you'll start crafting a build with many choices all geared towards amassing and upgrading a set of shiny fun things to attempt not to die with. You do have some, what would you call them, meta mechanics, meta choices, things like rerolls and banishes, things that let you fine-tune your choices a bit. You can get more of these for everyone with skill tree system, and there are also some varieties of these you won't start with and will need to obtain on the trees, things like blasphemies, which will cause an entire god to stop showing up in the choices at all. At level 11, you'll be able to choose one of 3 subclasses for each character instead of grabbing a skill. These classes are basically specializations that each focus on one facet of that character's build options. They're powerful and important to pulling a build together. I like this system, as I'm just a fan of complex class systems in RPGs no matter what, but I also like how this one lets you envision some specific mechanics you want to use, and then choose to specialize in maximizing those in particular. I'll admit, this game rewards knowledge of it very highly, more so than many Bullet Heavens, I think. Knowing what each character can spec into, as well as figuring out what gods have what themes and what that means for each of their pools of abilities, is all something you'll simply obtain over time. I know that needing prior knowledge is one of those things that people criticize this genre for. They tend to be heavily improved by spending some time reading a wiki with a burrito in one hand and some alcohol in the other. This is no exception. I will say that the game gives you a ton of knowledge in-game, rather than expecting you to find a wiki full of ads and scam banners, but still, I must admit that the mechanics here are geared heavily towards knowledge, which means a good part of the meta progression isn't about resources or skill trees, and is instead about your actual brain in real life gleaning all this info over time. During a run, the timer counts down. It's an actual timer, and you fail if it hits 0. You'll also be given objectives to complete at certain time thresholds. Each time this happens, some choices will pop up and provide you with some easier objectives for less reward, or some harder ones for more. Pick which one you want, and they will appear in blue on your map. When you complete an objective all the way, many of them are accomplished in parts, you'll get some gold, the main meta currency, and some spare time before the next objective choice spawns. Because the objectives spawn at specific times, if you get done early, you don't get to choose the next one early, but can use the free time in between to level and grab shiny stuff around the map. Each difficulty has a number of objectives you need to get through, as well as a time limit befitting that number. Completing the last one gives you the ability to spawn the final boss of that map, and you can waltz over to it and activate it anytime you want. Using these last few minutes, you may have to get a chest or squeak out an extra level, that can be important, but make sure to leave yourself a small time to stand in the circle to spawn the boss. Once the boss spawns, the timer stops, so you don't have to worry about running out of time during the fight. The objectives are a mix of things that exist on multiple maps and things that are unique to each one. You may have to roam around and collect a specific number of artifacts, or cats, seriously. You may also have to activate totems and sacrifice tons of enemies in close proximity to it until it's satisfied. I've noticed that some of the objectives can have lesser versions of mechanics you'll see on that map's boss, which I think is a pretty cool way to do it. Like in the mines, you'll have to destroy the power source to some machines that are trying to bonk you with a magic flail. The battery thingies spawn when you activate the machines, and you have to blow them up to cut the power. During the boss of that stage, it may gain a shield, and power pylons just like the other ones spawn. And now, since you've had to interact with those already, you're prepared for the boss version, so you automatically know exactly what to do. I think this is some pretty smart design. Add some fun gimmicks to the boss, and then add weaker versions of those gimmicks to objectives, so the player isn't seeing them for the first time in such a high-risk environment. Reminds me of the labyrinth areas of Path of Exile. There are also some other important things that will spawn during a raid. Occasionally these golden bird imp things will show up. Blowing up these elusive loot containers will drop a bunch of gold for you, as well as a piece of food, a healing item that will drop randomly that heals based on a percentage of your max HP. There are also some horn thingies, maybe Geller horns, I'm not sure. They rarely spawn, but stay until used. Standing next to them for a few seconds will fully heal you, but each one can only be used once, so make them count. There are a few kinds of chest one can find. Common ones will spawn around the map sometimes. Opening these will give you a choice between 3 possible rewards, generally either a small amount of meta currency or a potion that will enhance your stats for a short time. Then there are the rare chests. Sometimes elite enemies spawn, usually at the point when you least possibly want to see one. These are immediately visible because they're large and have health gauges above them. They also throw out much nastier attacks than other monsters. Taking these guys down will give you a nice chunk of XP, as well as spawning a rare chest. These also contain a choice of 3, but this time the meta currencies are in higher numbers, and the other things aren't timed potions, instead lasting for the rest of the run. These are pretty helpful to grab before the boss. Things like extra max HP or damage bonuses for skills are pretty huge during a tough fight. Each map also has some gimmicks unique to it, some being hazards, often involving how you actually traverse it. One map has mortars that spawn and rain down explosives on you until you find and destroy them. The mines have minecarts, obviously, that follow the tracks and can contain various things. And that map also can't be traversed normally, as the areas aren't always physically connected to each other. Instead, you can use these catapult thingies that fling you around the map but have a cooldown, as well as opening big stone doors between areas that open very slowly as you stand on the button. One map consists of a central floating island with several other islands spread out around it that require you to raise temporary fragmented bridges to get around. I really like these ideas, as the combination of objectives and stage gimmicks means that no map feels like any other one. The extra bits that you have to learn about each of them to ensure they all have a kind of flavor and atmosphere to them. Also, on each map, one of the objectives will always be a curse. There's a unique curse for every map, but these objectives require you to activate the curse and then survive it for a number of minutes. Some of these rain icicles down on you and slow you. Others severely limit your vision. And there's one that blows you around all over the place with strong wind. When this objective comes up, you can usually choose between 3 severities of the curse, each adding new horrible things to do to you, while also drastically increasing the gold reward. The different gods have plenty of things to gift you with, and I enjoyed the themes of each being so well defined. Skadi has lots of ice spells and freezing effects. Odin has lots of fancy passives of high power like double cast chance and a revive, and some very nasty skills that can be a bit tricky to use well, depending on what else you have, but are super strong, especially once evolved. Brock and Sindri work a bit differently, having only passive effects in the form of runes, but each one having an extra 4th high-level upgrade for maximum shininess. It's a list as eccentric as I'd hope from the notorious collection of bizarre failures that is the Norse pantheon. Upon completing a run, you'll get your gold and crystals, as well as unlocking any new things like maps, characters, and difficulties. I mentioned the meta currency here is gold, but you don't actually spend it exactly. Instead, from the main menu, you could go into the skill trees, at which point all of your gold will be converted into skill points to use. It starts off easy, but the more points you get, the more gold each new point takes. So there's a bunch of trees to spec into, one for each character and one for each god. The character trees will have a bunch of nice passives that are only in play when using that character, as well as some active skill improvements. Usually there will be one skill you didn't have at all to unlock, as well as evolutions for each skill, including the unlocked one. Evolutions have a higher level threshold, but they tend to change the skill quite significantly, and it's well worth unlocking them to try. The god trees will also have passive nodes to get, but these affect all characters once purchased, and are the main way to slowly increase the power of everyone. They'll also have a few new passive skills to unlock, as well as the aforementioned unlockable active and skill evolutions. The god skill evolutions tend to be extremely strong, and considering you can have 3 god skills, they contribute a ton to your overall build and power during a raid. So, what about the DLC? Conan as a character is pretty fun, and also unexpectedly flexible, with a few weapon types to spec into for a build. His passives also cover a lot of ground, and can kinda make him good at anything you'd like to try. He's also got a full skill tree like the others, and his evolved skills are really nasty, and easily make up for having only 2 slots for them. His dash is a shield bash, of course, and he has this new mechanic called Triumph that he can gain, which acts as a damage-ignoring buff for each charge. He also has several skills that interact with Triumph charges in some way. The new map, Stygia, is a dual-layer map where you begin in a very open desert area with ruins dotting the place, but on the edges there are entrances to an underground tomb area, which is darker and much more confined than up above. Some objectives will require you to go between the areas to accomplish them, and does a nice job of adding to the variety of the map. The final boss is down below in the central circular bit, giving you some room to fight, but not a ton of it. It has the same standard of level gimmicks, unique objectives, and a full complement of modifiers to make things harder that the other maps have, so it does feel like it belongs. I should probably also mention, just to be sure, that Conan is usable on any map, and any other character can also raid Stygia. They aren't exclusive to each other or anything, thankfully. That leaves the new god the DLC adds, which isn't exactly a god per se, it's fate, as in the force of luck and fate in general. It works very differently from the other gods and can be hard to work with, but has the chance of being quite strong if you can figure it out. When choosing fate, instead of a choice between 3 skills, you get 3 symbols that act a lot like a slot machine. Arrow, fist, goblet, and skull will roll randomly. Picking one will give you a choice between 3 passives related to the theme of the symbols. These passives are generally strong, but there's also a chance that some of the choices will turn into negative stuff or just get blanked out entirely. Instead, if you roll multiple of the same symbol, its choices get stronger, but so do the consequences if things go wrong. Rolling all 3 of the same symbol nets you some truly potent stuff if you can avoid the horrible consequences. Fate also has a skill tree like the other gods, but with no active skill unlocks. Instead, there are loads of nice passives, as well as a thing to help fortune go in your favor. There are also effects that automatically activate when 3 of a certain symbol are rolled, further deepening the slot machine comparison. Basically, it's a risk-reward system that is sort of hard to roll into a good build, but is probably extra fun if you manage to do it well. Overall, I think Jotunnslayer is a fantastic example of a survivor's like, and it does plenty enough differently to stand out in pretty big ways. From the excellent audiovisual presentation to the solid character mechanics and fun roster of fickle gods to steal power from, it's quite a mechanically complex entry in the genre, but it manages those mechanics well, and without confusion, in my opinion. The map-based mechanics, which make each place something a bit different, are helpful when it comes to trying to stand out as something that doesn't play exactly like another. It does have to justify the price tag due to it being a bit higher than most competitors. $15 for the full experience, and I think, due to all the reasons I listed above, that it does confidently justify the price, especially because it still isn't too much anyway. The Conan DLC is $5.50, I have no idea why that specific number, but it'll be up to you if you feel that that's worth it. It does add some fun new gameplay, so I'd say it's a case of, if you already enjoyed the base experience and want some more, $5 isn't a hard sell to expand something you already like. You can also get a bundle on Steam with the game and the DLC for $18, a nice little discount if you decide to pull the trigger on that. I know this video was a bit long, but I was hoping to be exhaustive about this due to the fact that it's an ultra-crowded genre at this point, and I feel that is something that truly stands out, and it's got to give some good reasons why, especially when it costs $15. Thanks a ton for watching. The Steam store page will be below, and I'll see you in the next video.